And we're back. Greetings, everyone. This is Lucian Vâlsan, broadcasting from Cluj-Napoca, Transylvania. As always, alongside with me is Herr Jon Gunnarsson, broadcasting from Deutschland, and our producer, James Huff, making sure everything works just fine, broadcasting from the States. Greetings, Mr. Gunnarsson.
Good evening. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, except for the fact that this has been an immensely busy week. I've been producing a lot more content than I expected. I also got involved into some local issues with my new channel in Romanian, basically drumming up support for a guy is being persecuted for saying politically incorrect things on Facebook about the mayor of a small town. So yeah.
Right, it's also been quite busy on my end, but still looking forward to doing this show. So, should we start?
Yeah, I was still curious about the weather because the weather has been. No, I'm
Whether
not joking. The weather has been acting out strangely in the last several days here. So I was curious whether the same does apply on your end.
it's actually really normal weather on my end. It's just sort of around 5 degrees, maybe a bit more than that occasionally. But it's mostly no rain or anything like that, so it's quite okay.
Quite tolerable. All right, then it's not a very long news section, but I guess we're going to we don't have to hurry up thanks to this. So yeah, let's kickstart it. The first is on your end.
Okay, the first one is from insideman.co.uk. Prime Minister and government become first to endorse International Men's Day. During parliamentary questions today on whether the government was going to mark International Men's Day on 19th of November, it was revealed that the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Theresa May, MP, supports the important issues the day seeks to address and highlight. Quote, I recognize the important issues that this event seeks to highlight, including men's health, male suicide rates, and the underperformance of boys in school. These are serious issues that must be addressed in a considered way. This was further supported by government ministers with Caroline Dinenage, MP, Parliamentary Undersecretary of State for Women, Equalities in the Early Years, who stated, as parents of sons up and down the country, we will all be conscious about the issues he has mentioned and the Prime Minister has mentioned. International Men's Day in the UK does take a very gender-inclusive approach and therefore believes issues affecting women and girls are also to be resolved. I'm aware that there are 60 countries around the world that celebrate International Men's Day, and there are various different ways that they do that, focusing on men's health and well-being, highlighting discrimination against men and any inequalities they face, improving gender relations and gender equality. This creates a safer world for everybody, Mr. Speaker, and is always to be commended. End quote. This was the first endorsement by a Prime Minister and government in the UK. The International Men's Day team in the UK said, this welcome prime ministerial and government endorsement clearly proves there is now growing acceptance and recognition of issues of inequality that affect men and boys, and the need to take these seriously. This is a landmark moment. It gives a clear signal to both politicians and the public sector of the need to step up to the plate and ensure that practical policies and action is taken to address them. This endorsement will provide comfort and extra impetus to charities, professionals, and organizations already working hard to support these issues and often struggle to have them recognized. There are at least 25 events already marking the day right across the UK, and there is still plenty of time to join these events or set up your own. These range from health days, education events, and conferences. The full list can be found at ukmensday.org.uk/events. The UK theme for the day continues to be making a difference for men and boys. The theme is designed to help more people consider what actions we can all take to make a difference by addressing some of the issues that affect men and boys, such as the high male suicide rate, the challenges faced by boys and men at all stages of education, including attainment, men's health, shorter life expectancy, and workplace deaths, the challenges faced by the most marginalized men and boys in society, for instance, homeless men, boys in care, and the high rate of male deaths in custody, male victims of violence, including sexual violence, the challenges faced by men as parents, particularly new fathers and separated fathers, Male victims and survivors of sexual abuse, rape, sexual exploitation, domestic abuse, forced marriage, honor-based crime, stalking, and slavery. The negative portrayal of men, boys, and fathers. The key issue of focus at the national level for 2016 is supporting boys with their academic, employment, personal and social and health education. There will also be a continuation of the attention on male suicide. International Men's Day also coincides with International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day.
Well, at the very least, they didn't remind us that it also coincides with the International Day of Cleaning Toilets, so that's nice. And no, it's not. I mean, it's funny, but it's not really a joke. It really does. Uh, I don't know. I guess it's good news. I mean, compared to the previous government, which tried to ignore the very existence uh, of the day, and the previous prime ministers who didn't really give a flying toss about it. At the very least, this prime minister is like, yeah, it does exist. Yeah, it kind of matters. That's kind of progress, isn't it?
Yeah, it's sort of a kind of an endorsement. It's not they're not getting fully behind the whole thing. This you can see this in formulations like what is it? Um, any inequalities. Oh wait, where is it? Um, yeah, any inequalities that they face. So it's sort of very non-committal phrasing that maybe there are inequalities they face, maybe not. Any they are faced, we are concerned about. But you know, it's still a lot better than nothing, which is what we got from previous governments.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I'm not. I'm not. Pulling out my celebration flags, and I'm like, yay! Well, no, but compared to what? I mean, it's always a compared to what type of analysis, and I mean, usually of the opinion that a country should compare with itself rather than others, and compared to 5 years ago, it's immense progress.
yeah, and I don't imagine that there's going to be enormous progress being made from this thing, but I mean, at most of the issues that men, or a lot of the issues that men face, I don't think they're going to be solved by government. But a lot of the issues are also caused by previous things the government has done. Um, Sorts of affirmative action for women and so on, and an education system that is very much focused on making sure that that girls succeed, and even if that means that boys will lag behind, things like that. If that stuff gets reduced as a result of this, then that's great. It's going to help a lot. When that's actually going to happen, I don't know, but at least this is sort of a first step. At least acknowledging that there are some problems that men face is a
Mhm.
step in the right direction.
Indeed, although there are some issues that could be not necessarily solved, but significantly ameliorated by the government. For instance, it says there in the list compiled by Inside Man, a publication which I don't like, by the way. I utterly despise this publication. But anyway, honor-based crime. It has long been the case, at least in Europe, in the West, whatever, uh, this assumption that honor-based murder and honor-based crimes in general affect generally women, which is not exactly true. In fact, the more hardline you go into these, how should I call them without calling them Islamist assholes? Diversity in loving, culturally enriching cultures. The more hardline you go with them, the more likely it is to have an actual parity of individuals, both men and women, being murdered or significantly persecuted for trivial nonsense. Now, so having the government taking a more realistic approach to honor-based crime rather than a feminist-driven approach would significantly improve things. Same with domestic abuse. If the government would start to, admittedly, the United Kingdom has made tremendous progress on this. I mean, you remember feminists were whining that they are losing funding because the government said you're going to provide shelters for male victims too, or no funding from the government.
Yep.
So, at least in some of these, sure, the government cannot solve the problem, but at the very least, it can ameliorate it by stop pandering to uh, overtly misandrist interests, basically.
Yeah, and the fact that this happens under a prime minister who is basically a feminist is, I think, a really good sign that even some people among the feminists realize that things are not as one-sided as sort of more hardcore feminists would like you to believe. That maybe they believe that even though we live in a patriarchal society, there's still a number of problems that men face, and having them believe that is better than nothing.
Yeah, it is better than nothing, and it's with these kinds of people that you can actually have a conversation with to begin with.
Yes.
You cannot have a conversation with the what's her name again? The girl that writes for the Guardian, that she's American. Oh, holy shit! The one that misses the cat calls.
Jessica Valenti?
Yeah, Valenti. You can't have a conversation with the Jessica Valentis of the world. But with the Theresa Mays of the world, you can at least have a conversation. Now, granted, you'll probably lose 70% of the conversation because she's nuts, but you still have a chance on the 30% of it. So, as you said, it's still better than nothing. Uh, and yeah, Theresa May is, a conservative in name only. I mean, there's very little conservative thinking when it comes to Theresa May, especially on social issues. If she had been a member of the Labour Party, she would probably be applauded by the Guardian. I'm just saying.
Yep.
Yeah, I wanted to say one more thing, and but I forgot about it. Oh yeah, the homelessness issue is also one that can actually be solved by the government, or at the very least, more successfully addressed. And again, ever since the latest government, the latest conservative government has been elected, there have been more and more homelessness shelters that used to be single sex, that is to say, for women, that have become no more single sex. So at least in some areas, the government has already done things that are okay, or at least towards the sanity direction of policy. um, and with regards to new fathers and separated fathers in particular, the fact that the process of desecretizing the family courts has actually gone forward in spite of all the opposition by the bureaucracy that surrounded the formerly secret family courts in Britain is an immense achievement. So yeah, I mean, there are things that the government can do.
Yeah, but it's mostly just undoing bad things government has done in the past, but
Yes,
still.
yes, indeed. Right, let's go to the silly place. Oh my god, this article is just absolutely insane. It's from the Independent, but I refuse to link to the Independent, so archive.es. It's
It's
going
a
to be.
silly place. Let's not go there. The male pill, the ultimate excuse for men to remain bachelors for longer. News of a startling breakthrough in the male contraceptive pill, one that could possibly work instantly as a nose spray, has caused me to reassess my thoughts on male-focused family planning. My beliefs, I felt, were somewhat dinosaur-esque. This was largely because in the height of my carousing and canoodling era, say the mid-90s, we young sexually emboldened ladettes came armed with the standard response whenever a male contraceptive pill was mentioned. Scientists could invent it if they liked. We'd laugh or cackle even, drunk on Smirnoff Ice, Lulu by Cacharel fumes, and post first wave feminist sexual freedom. But we'd not trust any man with such matters. Men, you understand, were idiots about anything remotely responsible, such as family planning, sexual health, or even self-maintenance. And not always soft-hearted, hapless idiots, much of the time, purposefully duplicitous ones. Wow, that is one run-on sentence. Quite impressive. Men sorting out their own contraception, preventing abortions, unwanted babies, and lifelong mutual resent, which, by the way, is not a noun. Noun is resentment, but whatever. Pfft, as if. They couldn't even sort out a round of toast and a clean pair of socks. Throughout the 80s and the 90s, the advertising breaks celebrated male fecklessness with endless joking commercials in which a diligent woman left her man to do some menial housework task. This resulted with him, in a matter of moments, destroying the kitchen, misplacing the children, skiving off to play golf, or simply gazing at a washing powder box with his tongue lolling out from his mouth like a keen yet ultimately useless golden retriever. If I were to pull some gender studies MA dungarees on for a moment, I'd argue that the belief males cannot be held responsible for either the contents of their scrotum or the fridge or washing basket emerged from centuries of women being denied earning power and authority and instead becoming the clandestine force running the household. If I were to be struck with a tedious task of scrubbing, broiling, and mapping menstrual cycles to avoid another screaming mouth, then, by God, we'd make these things appear like insurmountable tasks. But in 2016, we cannot scoff at the findings of a lead researcher, Professor John Howell of Wolverhampton University. Latest research uses a peptide which alters the way human cells work, switching off sperm's ability to swim. This could potentially be used as a pill or a spray, rendering men temporarily infertile. The results are startling and almost instant, Professor Howell said. When you take healthy sperm and add our compound, within a few minutes the sperm basically cannot move. So in the point of having sex, or at least a few hours beforehand, men could discreetly take care of unwanted pregnancy. Many women could be potentially freed from the risks of DVTs, depression, and months of post-pill disrupted cycle. In a regular, stable relationship, these findings could be revolutionary. Of course, for Tinder-style bang-and-run hookups, I would advise both sexes to steer away from any contraceptive that they cannot touch, peel, and roll on with their own hands. Someone, male or female, you met 50 minutes ago is most probably lying about everything from their hair color to their occupation to their relationship status, so don't trust them with a pill. But for the married, the cohabiting, and those settled into the long-term mutual antagonism we call love, the male pill will change the way we live. For once, men can take on the deeply unsexy joy of tangling with the GP receptionists over repeat prescriptions, being weighed, judged, and prodded. They cannot shoulder the unknown long-term risk of taking a drug. They can shoulder the unknown long-term risk of taking a drug, as well as that hovering feeling that if an accident happens, the blame is somewhat their own. Additionally, and perhaps this is many women's fear, men may become so utterly brilliant with this magical nose spray that birth rates simply plummet. No more of those seemingly accidental babies that he didn't want, but he did. Sorry, no more of these seemingly accidental babies that he didn't want, but she did. But oh look, it's here now. Modern man might end up being better at taking the pill than we ever were, because let's be honest, on so many occasions we've proved ourselves to be utterly useless. We have been known to forget or to take 3 at once. We thought last month's dose might still be working. We thought we didn't need it as if we were breastfeeding, or skipped a few days and thought, never mind, a baby might be quite romantic. Masculinity in 2016 has come to terms with the bleach cleaner, the spin cycle, nappy changing, and earning much less than his partner. Maybe, and this is the disconcerting thing, he'll be better at policing your womb than you. Oh boy.
Can you please translate that article for me from whatever gobbledygook that is into normal human language? Because I have to admit, I read the article 3 times. I have no idea what the fuck she wants. I mean,
Okay.
it just doesn't make sense. I mean, I can understand the last 2 paragraphs of it, but the rest of it, it just seems like 2 or 3 different articles stuck together.
Kind of see something. So she makes several points. The first one is that men are idiots. The second point is that you shouldn't trust someone with contraceptive if it's like a casual hookup thing, which is quite reasonable. And then the third one is that apparently women are bad at taking the pill, and they forget it and so on, and therefore it's good if a male contraceptive exists. I don't know how these things fit together.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, it sounds like it's 2 or 3 different articles just somehow stuck together by different authors, mind you.
So first it's like men are idiots and can't be trusted, and then women are idiots and can't be trusted. So therefore, we should trust men or something. I don't really get it.
To me, it sounds like a translation in terms of sexual politics of the already quite known meme of the 5 stages of Trump presidency. The first is denial, then is enraging, and then at the end of it is acceptance. It kind of is like that. First of all, it starts with you said men are idiots, whatever, we can't trust them, and then towards the end of it, the last paragraph is like, well, but maybe he'll be better at policing the thing than you were ever were. It just sounds, the thought process of it is quite weird. Now, the one thing that I would probably contest is the portion where is it the fourth or the fifth paragraph where she says women being denied earning power and authority and instead becoming the clandestine force running the household. How is it clandestine?
Yeah, I don't really.
Yeah, really?
Maybe she doesn't really know what the word means. She just stuck it in because it makes her sound educated or something.
That would be yeah. That's actually a very good explanation.
It just seems that this person doesn't have a very firm command of the English language.
Yeah. Although, in fairness, clandestine pretty much means the same thing in virtually any language. So, or actually in all languages. I mean, it's pretty much an international word. It exists in
I'm not saying
Chinese.
she isn't a native speaker. I mean, you can still be a native speaker and be quite bad at using
Yeah.
English.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
There's
That's
lots
true.
of people who think that using big words like clandestine will make them seem educated, and often they just don't quite know what the word means. It's like sort of they think they know what it means because they've read it a bunch of times, but don't know precisely what it means. So sometimes they just stick these words in and they just don't fit in their particular situation, and because they don't
Hmm.
actually quite know what it means.
Hmm. Hmm.
Maybe that's what's going on. I don't know.
It could be true. I mean, there are a few expressions and words used here that don't actually fit with the rest of the. I mean, it's part of it is quite informal, and then it comes in with appear like insurmountable tasks. I mean, come on. Yeah, I was expecting when I first found this article, I was expecting a bit of the usual claptrap, which was debunked. Recently there was a study on male contraceptives that was stopped because of its egregious side effects. And the feminist meme was like, "Oh, it was stopped because men are wimps." And what surprised me is that the most comprehensive rebuttal, I'll place it in the chat room, came from Vox.com. I didn't see that coming. I mean, first is BuzzFeed publishing reasonable articles. Now Vox.com. What is the world coming to? Which basically debunked the entire narrative. I private messaged you the link to if you're not on the chat room. I see you're not. So yeah, I was expecting a bit of whining on that too, because it's very interesting how the feminist discourse around this issue evolved. I mean, if you were still my co-host 2 years ago or 1 year and a half ago, and we were reading articles by feminists utterly against the very idea of the existence of male contraceptives other than condoms, which was in line with the entirety of the feminist tradition. Let's not forget, feminists have been opposing the funding of a male contraceptive for at least 45 years. So it was in line with the tradition. Yet lately, in the last 2 or 3 months, maybe a year, the discourse started to shift in the feminist camp. It's a very interesting phenomenon to observe.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Of course, I would guess there's still quite a number of feminists who are opposed to such a thing existing, but um, yeah, like it's a sort of thing that is like quite hard for them to actually justify, because a normal person looks at that and looks at feminists opposing male birth control and says that why, how does that make any sense? How clearly that means that you're against equality, that you're against men having the same options as women, and doesn't fit with the dictionary definition of feminism, and feminists at least want to maintain the appearance that this is what they're doing still.
Mhm.
So it sort of kind of makes them look bad to oppose it. So I guess that's why they stopped doing it.
Yeah, that's one explanation. And besides, even if you don't think men and women should have the same options, nevertheless, opposing male contraception is basically a Luddite position to take. You're basically saying we don't want more scientific progress. Period. Uh, that's not that cannot hold on for a very long period of time as a popular position. It just can't.
Yeah, I mean, those evil researchers taking away the jobs of poor nursery workers and teachers and so on. These, of course, are mostly female positions, so they're trying to take away women's jobs. Therefore, misogyny.
Yeah, which by the way is starting to happen. I mean, most of the private schools that are opened in the third world and are incredibly efficient are usually private schools with two or three teachers educating like 150, 200 kids. How? Well, it's videos, and most of it is online work. And it costs pennies, basically. I mean, there is an example of a network of schools in Ghana, I think, in the rural areas, where the private schools costs like $10 a year or something like that, and they produce far superior results, not just in comparison to Ghanaian state schools, but also compared to many state-run school systems in Europe. So, yeah, those researchers will going to steal jobs from the teachers for sure. Um, and same happens in many other respects. Now, what I want to address before we go to the next one is this portion, because this is an old argument, and I don't think we'll be able to defeat it anytime soon. Not because we are wrong, but because the argument is feelings based, and you can't really argue feelings. Quote: "No more of those seemingly accidental babies that he didn't want, but she did. But oh, look, it's here now." Uh, this kind of argument is. The idea that this should remain the status quo is, and this is a very dirty little secret, is very popular among women. Uh, a significant chunk of women actually like this idea. They like being able to do this. Now, admittedly, there are the reverse cases too. Some of them, probably because they are rarer, they end up being making headlines with boyfriends or husbands intentionally poking holes in the condoms, or switching the birth control pills with aspirins or whatever. Some of those do happen too, but they are a lot rarer. The other way around is a lot more common. uh, and this is going to be a tough sell to women. I guess the only chance is that science will just progress regardless of the political opinion of the day. Because otherwise, I don't think this will be defeated politically, because it's a feelings-based argument.
Yeah, but it's a kind of argument that is hard to make, because if once you state it that this is a good thing, you state it outright, then it's monstrous. That's not something that anyone would explicitly endorse. It's just something that people sort of implicitly
Yeah, but
think.
voting,
But
but voting is secret, and women are the majority electorate. You don't have to explicitly endorse it, you just have to believe it. And a significant chunk, I wouldn't dare to say most women, but a significant chunk of women actually do believe this. And I don't think that's going to change unless just simply science comes in, boom, this is the product, enjoy. And they're just, placed in front of the already achieved act.
I mean, okay, but you would for such a legislation to actually be proposed, you would at least need some sort of excuse for why you're banning it, and I kind of find it hard to come up with one. Like maybe it's not some sort of explicit political ban on it, but some sort of government institution, like something like the FDA in America might ban a
Yeah,
particular
or the
male birth
European
control pill, or
Association for Medicine, yeah, which is
you
our
know,
FDA basically.
yeah, yeah, but such an organization might do that, but it, that's not a blanket ban on male birth control. It's only going to affect one particular um, one particular form of male birth control, and if and I mean such an institution is not directly influenced by the voters, and there's some sort of huge bureaucracy behind these institutions, and these kinds of feeling-based arguments probably are not going to cut that much to be that influential in an institution like that. So I kind of doubt that there's going to be that much political problems with the male birth control bill.
Well, I want to be wrong and I want you to be correct, but uh, considering how much opposition this idea got in the past, I just don't think. I think there will always be enough bureaucrats. Now, let's not forget. You mentioned huge bureaucracy. Well, what is the sex that dominates any huge bureaucracy? It's hint. It's not men. Uh, I just
At the upper echelons, it is.
Yes, but all these regulatory agencies that create all the red tape that pretty much makes everyone's of our lives harder. Those are rarely men. At least not in Europe. In the US, honestly, there are more men than women. But for instance, the European Agency for Medicine, which is basically the EU's FDA, just go on their website and show me more than two men in their upper echelons. There aren't. There are exactly two.
Okay.
And the bureaucracy itself is just like that. And I don't think they'll just roll over that easily. I hope they will. I hope you will be proven correct and I'll be proven wrong. But I just don't think it will happen. The level of opposition to this is quite high. Now, admittedly, that would probably be the least problem, the least relevant issue. Much more relevant issue is, of course, the difficulty of getting it to work to begin with. That's why I linked to the Vox article for those listening live and are in the chat room. Basically, it turns out it's a lot more difficult than anyone expected. Even with the modern technology, it's a lot harder to produce a male contraceptive that doesn't fuck up everything else, basically.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to the next one. The next one is from my backyard. This one is very funny. So, study. Romania has the smallest gender pay gap. It goes like this. The wage gap between women and men in Romania is 4.5%, favoring the latter, 4 times smaller than the European average, which currently sits at 16.7%, favoring men. The highest gap of 28.1% is recorded in Estonia, according to a recently published study for the European Day of Equal Pay celebrated on November the 3rd. As for the annual gap on global pre-tax earnings, which include factors like working in the household, interrupting one's career to raise a child or care for a relative, Romania has a gap favoring men of 26.9%, again much lower than the European average, which sits at 39.8%. Now, skipping the statements from the Brussels bureaucrat, the factors that contribute to wage differences in Romania are the unequal distribution in various sectors of the economy. Women generally tend to work in fields that have a lower hourly rate for the same qualifications, such as education, healthcare, or social work. Another factor is age, which in Romania's case favors women, since women who do compete directly with men tend to be younger and competing with older men, which in hourly salaried position is favorable to young women, since they can and indeed do work longer hours compared to their older male colleagues. Another factor that currently favors men is the general propensity of men to be far more likely to work full time, while women are more likely to work in various types of part or partial time arrangements. Also, the wage gap is influenced by the fact that certain types of activities that pay less, such as cleaning or caring, are oftentimes taking place outside of the regulated market. Thus, a lower difference could in fact mean a smaller occupation rate amongst women. And the rest of the article is EU propaganda. We can safely skip that. So, this is a left-wing newspaper. So, damned if you do, damned if you don't. I mean, Sweden is oppressive because it has a gender pay gap that is 5 times bigger than Romania's. Romania is oppressive because it has a gender pay gap that is too small. So that allegedly might mean that there is a lower participation rate, which, by the way, is not true. The labor participation rate of women is the highest in Latvia and the lowest in Malta, with the UK, Romania, Poland, Hungary, Cyprus, and Belgium being basically the countries that give the EU average. But who cares about the facts these days? In any event, the news itself created a lot of butthurt. It was nice to see the feminists trying really, really hard to avoid this piece of news altogether. An economist at a private university did the math and factored in what the feminists always forget and proved based on this data that the actual GPG is, well, statistical zero. And that's bad news for feminists. I mean, it's almost like no laws of any kind that favor women over men tend to actually produce, well, fairer results.
Yeah, I find it's always really funny whenever you point out that women are doing quite well in some area. Feminists will loudly decry that, and they will denounce you, and they will call pointing out these facts misogynist. Shouldn't they just be happy that we're making progress, and look at what we've achieved, something like that? Maybe they could say that, but no, it's angry denunciations.
Yeah, I never understood, and I think this is one of the reasons why I routinely say that progressivism, feminism, leftism in general is literally a mental disorder. Because if it's just an ideology, then noticing the fact that there have never been a population group in the history of mankind that was better off than women in Europe today. I mean, that should be a reason for celebration, shouldn't it? Yet feminists in particular are never happy, ever. I mean, if you ask them what is the end goal, what do you want, what would make you happy, it almost always I almost always get blocked when I ask these kinds of questions, which kind of shows that probably there is no answer to it. There is nothing that would make feminists, cheer and be happy.
Yeah, there just is no end to it. It's just the perpetual revolution. You just always want to achieve more and more. You just always need more progress. It just never ends, and women are always victims. And
yeah, but the more progress you get, you kind of start eating your own. I mean, like this article is doing. I mean, oh my God, we have a statistical zero gender pay gap. Well, that's probably because women are oppressed. Well, come on, give me a fucking break. Really?
yeah, here's a feminism work. You take some facts and you figure out how this fact implies that women are oppressed.
Yeah, there has to be a way this makes me a victim. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it always boggles my mind. Now, I don't know if I ever translated it into English. I know I wanted to, but I don't know if I ever got around to do it. I wrote an article in 2014 called "Gender Pay Gap Between Numbers and Propaganda." I think I did translated it into English. Hold on a second. Between numbers and
I've read an article of yours on AVM, so
yeah,
I believe that
I
is in English on AVFM.
yes, I have. Yeah. Oh, sorry, it's 2013. Oh my God, I'm feeling old already. I placed that in the so the article is called "Gender Pay Gap Between Numbers and Propaganda." I first wrote it. So yeah, I first wrote it in 2012, and then translated it into English in 2013. Basically, what I showed in that article, and all the mathematics is in there, so for anyone to read, is that when you have a freer economy, or at the very least much less regulated, and especially with far less interventionism in terms of, well, institutionalized sexism, because that's what feminism actually is, that tends to produce indeed much larger gender pay gaps on various sectors, but when you look at the overall economy, it gets the overall results are significantly fairer. So, for instance, in the case of Romania, because there are no affirmative action laws that favor women, and virtually no company has female favoring affirmative action. Well, some of them do, but very few of them. Almost all of them don't. What you have is very high gender pay gap, for instance, in telecommunications, in which women earn 133% of what men earn. Whereas in another industry, such as insurance, men earn something around 135% of what women earn. So you have very, very high disparities per industry, either favoring men or women. But when you look at the overall of it, the results are significantly fairer. And I think that's a much fairer trade-off than the forced quote-unquote egalitarian trade-off, which in practice tends to actually be significantly more unfair to women.
Yeah, and there's just no reason why this why there should be a parity between the pay of men and women, either in the economy as a whole or in any particular subsector. And if you go with this narrow-minded approach of everything has to be equal, just get all sorts of distortions.
Yes, you do. And well, I skipped the rest of the article because I deemed it as EU propaganda, because it literally is. It's a translation from a communique in French by the EU. But that portion of the article complains about what they call segregation in the workplace. What they mean by that is that you have sectors where there are 80% women and sectors where there are 80% men. And you have sectors where women overwhelmingly earn more than their male colleagues, and sectors, of course, where men overwhelmingly earn more than the women. And apparently, Romania is amongst the most segregated economies in Europe. I don't think that's a problem. There are, well, as the market shows, there are sectors in which women are simply better and sectors in which men are simply better. Why should that be a problem?
Because it's unequal. Therefore, ipso facto bad.
Well, when I hear that, I'm usually reminded by that. I don't remember the guy. I just saw him in Bucharest, Yarrenbrook from the Ayn Rand Institute, who said, well, equal is unfair. I mean, yes, it is unequal, but so what? It makes everyone better off.
Yeah, but don't you remember that study that compared gender equality among all the countries in the world from last week?
Yeah, and Rwanda was like the seventh most egalitarian country in the world, and the United States like the 45th. Romania was 48th. I mean, I was like, really?
Because
speaking of which, there are a few Rwandan refugees in these countries. I'm just saying.
Yeah, so if you're a woman from Rwanda and you're suffering, at least you can take comfort in the fact that the men around you are also going to be suffering, and shouldn't that cheer you up?
Yeah, yeah, that's a very good way of putting it. I mean, equality in misery is just less preferable than inequality in prosperity. I can't believe in the current year I still have to point that out. And I'm somewhat half joking, especially in Europe. I mean, when you have almost half of the bureaucracy coming from Eastern Europe, and most of those bureaucrats are 40 or older, so they've been through communism, they know what equality under misery actually means. The fact that you still have to point out that, well, inequality in the current zeitgeist is still preferable, with all its problems and stupidities and whatnot, is still preferable than being equal.
Yeah, but I mean, you can't expect most people to have common sense, I guess.
That's probably true. It's a dying breed, and it's oppressive. And what was that? Oh yeah, science itself is oppressive. So of course, common sense is just a patriarchal construct. You can't
of course.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, let's go to the next one.
The next one is from Der Spiegel. 3 acquittals. Judge accuses prosecutors of severe misconduct. In a trial over the sexual assaults of New Year's Eve, the State Court of Hamburg has acquitted 3 defendants. In the course of the trial over sexual assault and slander, the presiding judge sharply criticized police work, as the spokesman of the court reports. According to the judge, serious mistakes had been made when the woman in question was questioned. Before her first interview with the police, the 18-year-old was shown photographs by the police which documented the events at the Reeperbahn and the Große Freiheit. Only after recognition capabilities of the victim had thus been tampered with did they question the woman, the court spokesman said. During the interview, one police officer allegedly accused her of knowing that one of the men had groped women, but that hadn't been true. Later, during the trial, the victim was unable to identify the men. In the light of this, the judge showed how shocked she was at how easily the justice system can be shaken, as the Norddeutsche Rundfunk reports. As the court spokesman told, she also apologized to the men for the mistake made by the investigators. The Hamburger Morgenpost quotes the judge with the following words. Due to public pressure and pressure from the media and politicians, the police were very determined to get results in their investigation. The doubts about the men's guilt extend beyond investigatory mistakes. At least one of the 3 men now acquitted could only be seen on the video footage after the victim had already left the crime scene, the spokesman said. For the other 2 defendants, there was, quote, strong evidence that they weren't involved in the attack. The men from Morocco, Tunisia, and Iran will receive 25 euros per day in compensation for the time they spent in investigative custody, in total about 4,600 euros each. After New Year's Eve, about 400 women in Hamburg and 650 women in Cologne reported incidents of sexual harassment or assault, according to data by the Federal Office on Crime. In total, there have been almost 900 counts of sex crime, with more than 1,200 victims. Back in summer, only about 120 suspects had been determined. Thus, only a handful of perpetrators were ever sentenced.
Well, whereas I do remember receiving a lot of flack for daring to question and say that, look, definitely something really nasty has happened there. Definitely the media is a cunt for covering up the events, but nevertheless, let's not forget that probably some false allegations there also going on. I got a lot of flack for that, I do remember.
Yeah, with an event like that, there's this strong impulse to just do something, to just arrest someone. But arresting someone who's actually innocent, or sentencing someone who's actually innocent, it would be an even worse miscarriage of justice than if the perpetrator is never found. And it's especially the case when it's foreigners who are the perpetrators. Then they sort of often just get lumped into one category, and it's just this sort of sentiment. You just have to arrest some of those people, and if it's not exactly the right kind of people, then that's maybe not the biggest problem, and you shouldn't look too closely. They're probably guilty anyway, because don't you know that people from those countries, they're all misogynist anyway. So if they didn't commit this particular crime, then they're probably harassed some woman in the past. So it's all right if you arrest them.
Yeah, but being a misogynist is still not a crime. I mean, yeah, most of them are misogynists. Let's not forget that. I mean, that's true. But then again, that's not a crime. Being a misogynist is still not a crime, and will never be, probably, just like being a racist is not a crime.
Yeah, though, of course, voicing racist opinions in a number of countries is indeed a crime.
And that's unfortunate.
Yep, but let's not go into that. Yeah, and there's this kind of pressure being put on police is indeed a problem, because yes, there were lots of these crimes, and yes, things should be investigated. But if you put this is, if you exert this kind of influence on witnesses, it tends to produce false accusations. I mean, they use these sort of manipulative techniques on this young woman, and I mean, as far as I can tell, this woman was actually assaulted, and there's video evidence of that. So someone assaulted her. It's just not these particular three men in question. But yeah, that is a strong pressure to just get someone, and that leads to a lot of unfortunate results.
Yeah, as harsh as it may sound, I would dare to argue that not doing nothing as a state or as a police uh, is better than doing something incredibly wrong, such as manipulating witnesses to incriminate basically the wrong people, the individuals who did not commit the crime being investigated. So not doing nothing, as bad as it may be, is still preferable than doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, and this is kind of why having the rule of law is a good thing. That you need proof that someone actually committed, some particular person actually committed this particular crime before you can arrest someone. And it's not it's not just about sating the public's need for vengeance or something like that. If you don't have proof that this particular person committed this particular crime, then no one gets arrested, or at least no one gets sentenced, and that's a good thing. That's how it's supposed to work.
Yes, and various legal scholars throughout history have written about this. That is, sometimes it is preferable, even for the obviously guilty to get away, than to have much lower standards of evidence and end up with lots of innocents being sentenced, prosecuted, persecuted, and so on. But in this particular case, as far as I'm concerned, things are as clear cut as they could be.
Yeah, I mean, it's of course still possible that these men committed some sort of acts of sexual harassment when the cameras were not directed at them. We don't know that, but there's just no evidence that they committed any sort of crime. So obviously they were acquitted. And the fact that this investigation has gone this far and it has resulted in an actual trial is already quite scandalous.
Yeah, and again, I mean, we're on this article was published October 31st, November 1st, something like that.
Yeah, a couple of days ago.
Yeah, so we're talking about an investigation about a crime allegedly committed by these people. Now, the crime itself existed, but it was just not committed by these people. 11 months ago, for crying out loud. Or yeah, is it 11? No, 12, 10 months ago.
10, yeah.
Yeah, so these guys have been put through a 10 months investigation process, including preventative arrest, if I understood correctly, because that's why they're being paid reparations to.
Yes.
So including being arrested for something that most obviously did not do. That's a bit too long. I mean, I don't know how the procedures in Germany are, but shouldn't there be something to speed up the process a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know. This is something that sort of confuses me, is why they have so much trouble actually finding these people, because there exists lots of video evidence. Presumably, it should be quite easy to find the perpetrators that were actually caught on video. So I don't really know why it's taking so long and why there's so few people have actually are even suspects, and only like a small handful of people has actually been sentenced to anything. I don't quite know why there's such a problem there, but yeah, for whatever reason, the investigation is not going fast enough. Maybe that's why they thought that they just had to get someone, and so they just said, hey, if we have these three guys, why not them? They look like the type,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, probably some kind of judgment like that was somewhere involved. I think I have an idea about why things are going so slow. Now, remember, a significant chunk of the individuals directly involved into the events in Köln were basically illegal immigrants or undocumented migrants, which is the latest terminology, or individuals who did not reside, at least not legally, in Germany. So, for instance, maybe they had the French citizenship or French or why not Austrian um, residence permits and whatnot, and they could easily travel to Germany for the new year in general. I mean, most people try to be somewhere else other than their home during the new year. Not me, but most people do. Could very well be the case that some of the individuals caught on camera cannot be identified because they don't actually live or have any legal connection with Germany whatsoever.
Yeah, that's probably it.
And
Um,
again, the Europol database, as much as the European Union tells us that it's fantastic, it's actually quite shitty. And getting, for instance, French police to cooperate on such a case, it takes forever because you have to go through the entirety of the French bureaucracy, and may God have mercy on your soul if you're ever in need of that. I mean, I know this quite sort of firsthand. I mean, someone that I know, an acquaintance of mine, had to fight a custody battle for her daughter with the French state, basically. I mean, the father was very okay with the idea of letting his daughter to spend half of the year in Romania, half of it in France, but the state disagreed. So they had to fight it on the distance, and the Romanian state, had to go through the entirety of the bureaucracy. It took 1 year and a half for a much easier procedure. So for the procedure of getting the French state to give you the actual contacts and the data that they have on a citizen of there or a migrant that they may not know much about anyway, to share it with the German police, that's quite problematic in the sense that their bureaucracy is in such a way that um, uh, it kind of tends to produce these kinds of results. I think that's part of the reason why the investigation is going so slow.
yeah, it could be.
Mm. And of course, there is the fact that, well, when you flood the courts with disdainful nonsense, well, the courts have less time for the actual serious things. I mean, the courts are still busy prosecuting people for not paying what is that, the TV license fee, sentencing people to community service or various fines for making a Facebook group that talked about migration in a politically incorrect way. I mean, when you flood the courts with these kinds of things, no wonder they don't have time for the actual things that probably matter a lot more for the public safety.
Yep, but Facebook groups are indeed quite a threat, so we need to
Yeah,
be on top of that.
yeah, I know. The Facebook groups are an utter mess. Can you imagine? Ah, okay. Let's go to the next one. Coming from Norway, from the very upstate of Norway, probably the last bastion of civilization before actual Arctic wilderness begins, from Tromsø. NRK put up cameras in the kindergarten because the men felt under suspicion. The inspectorate received this autumn a notification that camera surveillance has been installed at the Culture Kindergarten in Tromsø. The notification revealed that this included peephole cameras in several rooms in the nursery, including the playroom and the toilet. The inspectorate therefore required a statement from the nursery. The chairman, Jon Wedding, confirms in an email to the supervisory agency that the Culture Kindergarten has indeed installed door peephole cameras with display. The purpose of installing these was to act as deterrents for any sexual abuse, unwanted behavior among children, and secure parents, children, and the staff from suspicion, writes the chairman. He would contribute to better supervision of children and adults in a room without windows into the other environment in the kindergarten. Children's free play should be conducted without undue interference by adults who constantly open the door, he said. Door sleep seats were mounted in the wake of the great assault case in another kindergarten in Tromsø, where a nursery employee was indicted and later convicted of multiple offenses against children in the kindergarten. Some of the staff members at the nursery experienced a high amount of insecurity and fear of suspicion if they were alone in a room with children, and such peephole cameras were thus considered to lessen the suspicion on them and ameliorate the perceived insecurity. Have you considered other alternatives to camera surveillance, such as windows? Asked the inspectorate. Well, older children will often sit in peace on the toilet without other children seeing them. One window would give too much insight, especially in the bathrooms, responded Vedding. In the email, the chairman wrote that male employees in the culture kindergarten feel much less suspicion after door safety cameras were installed, since they now know that they can be observed in the room in a room without other forms of transparency, and hope that the nursery can still have these. Our children are the most valuable thing we have, and we want to protect these in the best way. Therefore, we have decided to install these cameras for us to have the best possible supervision on our children and provide a safe and good upbringing, added Vedding. New kindergartens in Tromsø are built today are built in a way so that children and staff are not able to hide away with the access to all rooms. Culture kindergartens, however, is over 20 years old and is not designed in the same way. If the inspectorate believes that we at the culture kindergarten have done something wrong, then we will of course abide by this. We must see if we can build on the space we already have, or do the supervision of our children and staff in a different but still safe way, writes the chairman. We have received the letter from the culture kindergarten, but have not yet processed the answer, said briefly the senior advisor Eva Marble with the inspectorate to NRK Tromsø. So, institutionalized, always be recording.
Yeah, I mean, in installing cameras in lavatories, I don't quite know about that, but in other rooms, sure, why not? Seems like a reasonable solution.
Yeah, look, I'm not a big fan of video surveillance, period. In fact, I'm a strong advocate against it for various reasons. But I'm particularly not a fan of video surveillance, especially this kind of invasiveness, in uh, in preschool, kindergartens, primary school, mainly for cultural reasons. I don't want the next generation to be raised with the idea that it's okay for the big brother to watch them at any moment of any given day and a given time. Now, with that said, on the other hand, considering the inherently misandric climate that exists in virtually all kindergartens that are west from Poland, um, I'm not particularly surprised that it has come to this. I mean, it's quite literally the only way that a man working there can be 100% sure that he'll not be subjected to false allegations, or if that happens, evidence to the contrary is easily available, and thus the amount of undue pressure and undue torment upon him is reduced significantly.
Yeah, it's quite sad that it has to come to this, but like if you're going to have men working in kindergartens and you have this rampant fear of sexual abuse committed by men, then I guess this is the only real solution. Other than as I say in this article, to have to construct kindergartens in such a way that the teachers can't really be alone with their children, which I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, but yeah, it
It's a
is quite a problem.
disaster. It's a disaster. The idea that the teachers can never be alone with children. I think that's a lot worse. But then again, we've seen less from Europe, admittedly, more from North America. cases, even at the university level, let alone preschool, elementary school, and whatnot, where male teachers, in particular, tend to leave the door open when they do, private consultancy with a child, with a student. This has already become quite a practice because of the fear of false allegations. Now, the what always fascinates me is and this tends to be quite cyclical. Once in roughly 20 something years, some societies, particularly the Protestant ones, tend to have a period of what I usually call pedo hysteria, a period when suddenly a significant chunk of the society, maybe even a majority, tends to think that there is a looming constant threat on all children, that there's a pedo behind every bush, basically. uh, Norway has had this last time in 94 or 95, when that particular crisis was used by a very prominent Norwegian feminist. Her name is Eva Lundgren, to basically build up her career. At one moment, it was claimed that there are huge networks, transnational networks of satanic pedophiles. This was the feminist mainstream discourse, mind you. That basically, they eat children, they rape children, and whatnot. In Sweden and Norway at that time, they dug up entire forests to find corpses. Of course, there was no corpse because there was no network. But nevertheless, it took a tremendous amount of effort from the authorities to quash the mythology and extinguish the societal crisis. Everyone was worried about the pedos that are behind every bush. Nowadays, it seems a similar sentiment is emerging again in Norway, not in Sweden, um, triggered by one singular case that happened in Tromsø. But then again, I looked up to see if there are similar cases, and the only one that is mildly similar to that one happened like in 1980 something, 87, 86, something like that. So, based on one case alone to fundamentally transform everything, just seems like an overkill to me.
Yeah, it's kind of like a modern day witch hunt. I mean, pedophiles do exist, unlike witches, but it's sort of the same principle. And I don't know about this cyclical nature. I mean, I I wouldn't say that from one example that this happened 20 years ago and now it's something like that might be happening again. That therefore it's some sort of cyclical nature. I
Well,
don't think there's enough
at
evidence for
least
that.
in the case of Norway, there was a similar row in late 60s. There was another one, of course, right after World War II, when there is a Nazi pedophile somewhere hiding behind every bush. That was the scare. If you read the press of those times, in 47, 1946, 47, 48, 49. So, at least in the case of Norway, it is quite cyclical. Now, I haven't dug earlier than 1930s, so maybe it's a modern phenomenon, and it didn't necessarily happen before the 20th century. But it happened quite a few times and quite at relatively regular intervals of time. That's why I said that it's pretty much a little bit cyclical. At least in the case of Norway, I have little doubt that this is. Maybe it's just a modern thing. Maybe it's not necessarily. How should I put it? Something that always happens, but it has been happening quite regularly in the last 70 to 80 years for sure. Uh, and I genuinely don't understand it. I mean, I do understand it on somewhat on an emotional level, but come on, fundamentally transforming everything because there was one case somewhere. I don't know. It sounds like a way much of an exaggeration. And again, I don't think it's healthy. And this is a subjective opinion. I haven't done the research on it to see if there is, and probably there is no research because it is a new phenomenon. But I don't think it's healthy to raise the next generation with the implicit assumption that surveillance everywhere, including in the lavatory, is somewhat of a good thing and it's for their own good. I just don't buy this. I don't think that's healthy.
Yeah, that I, I I tend to agree with that. I don't know how much it's going to influence people's opinion on surveillance in public places and so on later in life. I really have no idea about that, but yeah, I don't think it's as you said, I don't think it's healthy to sort of have this idea that or this impression that someone is always watching you. That I I think that that's very unhealthy. I think it's good to have some privacy. Um, sometimes the to have some sort of place where you can retreat to, where you can just be on your own and no one is observing you, and you don't um, feel like you're being watched and evaluated and so on all the time.
Hmm.
Um, I,
Equally unhealthy, I think it's the concept of open space, which is the new model of Norwegian kindergartens, as described also in the article and as talked about in previous articles about Norway. I also that kind of setup, that kind of building in kindergartens pretty much transmits the implicit message of to children that privacy is somewhat of a luxury, or probably even just something, a chimera that just doesn't exist. There is no such thing as privacy.
you know, this idea of this building where everyone would always be watched, the panopticon, was originally supposed to be a penal institution where you send prisoners, and they will always be observed, um, and then they won't do bad things, as was the idea of Jeremy Bentham famously. Um, but now we're actually applying that to kindergarten children. That's
Yes.
quite interesting.
I think it's appalling. I mean, I remember, even I thought it's a little bit far fetched, but nevertheless, I wrote it for hyperbole effects. For hyperbole effects, I wrote a series of articles almost 10 years ago, in 2007, 2008, about how our schools, and it was mostly focused on Romania, which pretty much follows the exact same pattern. I mean, there's little difference on how our schools are turning into literal prisons. And I went to various schools and took pictures and photographed, and also had some uh, before 2005. Going to videotape in a schoolyard was not only, well, technically it is legal now too, but you probably have a lot of explaining to do. But before 2005, it was not the problem. I mean, TV stations used to routinely do it and whatnot, because they needed generic images with children playing and whatnot. It was perfectly normal. After 2005, something happened. Now it's almost impossible to get some footage from inside of a schoolyard. Most schools have shit. I don't know the term in English. Basically, iron bars on the windows, cameras everywhere, surveillance everywhere. Also, one or two special designated teachers that literally do patrolling inside the school and outside the school, in the yard, in the courtyard. Uh, that's literally a prison. And at that time, I thought that it's a little bit exaggerated for me to call it a prison, but nevertheless, I did. And now I'm starting to think that I was maybe a little bit too kind, because it's not prison like, it's literally prison. And reading what the progress in Norway looks like, I'm like, come on. Uh, we're treating children like inmates in these institutions. Now, sure,
Well,
the intentions are different, but as we both know, intentions don't necessarily guarantee decent results.
well, at least in Europe, we still don't have metal detectors, unlike a number of American
Thank
schools.
goodness. Thank goodness we don't have that. Come on, that would be insane. Although I have to say, some schools, including state schools, at least in this country, I haven't really observed schools in other countries because I don't really visit schools when I go abroad. But at least in this country, some schools do have some sort of electronic access, um, even inside the yard. So you have to actually explain to a guard why are you there, and have to say, look, I actually have a class at this hour. Apply to 12-year-olds or 11-year-olds. That's insane.
Yeah,
And sometimes, they get searched. What's in your bag? Well, it's my books, for crying out loud. And I mean, all of these things just quite literally did not exist 10 years ago, and now they're so commonplace. It is astounding to me. It is. Thank goodness we have saved a lot of time, because I really wanted to bring this up, and I don't know what your position is on this, but to me, I'm quite literally worried for how the next generation will perceive things. Now, admittedly, there is the internet. We can inform the next generation, and most of the young people coming in are very smart and kind and nice, and that's great. But still, I mean, if you raise someone from the age of 3, because in Norway at least, and Sweden too for that matter, they start this institutionalizing thing for the age of 3. At least in Romania, we start from the age of 7. So, there is still uh, time for the parents to instill some decent values, if they have them, because some parents are degenerate, of course. But if you start putting a child from the age of 3 into these kinds of institutions where there's surveillance everywhere, and they grow up like that till the age of 20 or 19, until they graduate from high school in the identical environment, that creates a certain set of underlying assumptions that will be very hard to defeat in adulthood through reason and arguing and logic and whatnot.
Yeah, I always wonder how much this sort of stuff can actually influence people's opinions. Because it sort of seems to me that a lot that sometimes it will make people more in favor of things like surveillance, but it might also have the opposite effect when people are being watched all the time, and they're resented, and then they are even more against uh, more against the surveillance being extended in the public sphere. So it's sort of hard to say, because there's really sort of plausible explanations for effects in both directions. So it's hard to say what kind of influence it will actually have. Also, often people's opinion about sort of what is normal, people's opinions on politics and so on, is also influenced quite a lot by genes. So a lot, so a lot of these things so these attitudes are quite hard to change. Like, for example, they've done some studies in the US with um, university graduates, and their political views from the time they go to university and are indoctrinated by all these leftist professors to the day they graduate changed very little. So even though they're there for 4 years or however long, listening to all these leftist opinions, it doesn't really change their political outlook very much. So I don't know how much influence in that area schools actually have. I think oftentimes people overestimate how important that is.
Yes, but then nevertheless, what you're saying applies to university level. So that's almost adults, or well, legally they're adults, but our brain ends maturing around the age of 23, 24. But nevertheless, that's adults, still legal adults. I'm talking 5-year-old, 4-year-old children, when the brain is much more malleable and one's personality is much more malleable than it would than it would be at the age of 19, 20, 21, 22. As for the keeping one's politics and whatnot, yeah, basically conservative students go through leftist universities and they stay conservative, whereas moderate and center left students go through university and come out far further to the left, basically. And that's problematic first and foremost because leftist students are being done a disservice because they're never exposed to contrary points of view, so their argument in real life becomes very weak. That's how we get social justice warriors. Because I said several times in my videos in the past that there was a time when leftists were smart. I still thought they were wrong, but at the very least they were smart. You could reasonably have an argument with them and understand at least where the disagreements come from. These days it's no longer the case. Especially the younger, the more recent a leftist is, the less likely it is to be able to have a proper conversation, because no longer being exposed to any kind of point of view thanks to the safe spaces and whatnot, uh, they can argue poorly for their politics. I mean, even older leftists are starting to notice. They're like, gosh, these kids are right for the wrong reasons.
Yeah,
But then again, that's university. I'm talking kindergarten and preschool and elementary school, primary school. I think that the influence there is a little bit bigger. I don't know how bigger it is, and maybe you're right. Maybe it still doesn't matter that much, but still, we can agree that there is higher malleability on 3-year-olds and 5-year-olds than on 25-year-olds.
yeah, but that sort of malleability doesn't mean that children come out significantly changed. Like, for example, we know from the research of the influence on parenting, we um, can look at what sort of influence parents have on their children by looking at or what sort of influence parenting has on children as compared to just genes, by looking at twin studies where they compare. There was one they compare identical twins, and they have the same genes more or less, and but different environments. If one of them is adopted or both of them are adopted, um, so this way they can tease out whether it's parenting or genes making differences in what the fact that parents or children are typically similar to their parents. And what they find is that genes have a much larger influence on the way that children turn out as adults. But in the short run, parenting can have quite strong effects. So if you the way you parent will change the behavior of your child in the short run, but um, once your child grows up, parenting has basically such low influence that at least in those studies they can basically not detect any sort of influence. Um, Now these adoption studies, of course, they typically it's middle class people. It's not people who abuse their children or something like that. So that, of course, will have a negative influence. But sort of across the normal range of parenting styles, it has very little detectable influence, but it has strong influence in the short run. And that might also be the case with the way schools influence children. That maybe children are quite malleable in the short run, but in the long run, probably not so much.
That's a very good argument. I didn't think about. I never thought about that. Yes, but still, you said that in these studies they sample individuals who haven't been abused and whatnot. Okay, fair enough. But what if? And again, this is very subjective on my part. I could be entirely wrong. What if this kind of surveillance state in starting from kindergartens, quite literally treating them as inmates, is in itself an abuse? Maybe it's a more passive abuse, maybe done with good intentions and with a smiley face, but nevertheless an abuse.
Yeah, maybe that's the case, but I don't think it's going to have that drastic effects. Like even if there's lots of cameras in schools and kindergartens, you don't spend all your time at school. You spend a lot of time at home as well, where there's no cameras, presumably. Um,
Presumably, and that's how you phrase that. Yeah, in Norway they tend to spend 8 to 9 hours in kindergartens. Now the time gets shorter as they grow up, but in kindergarten they spend 8 to 9 hours per day, sometimes 10. So I don't know how that helps.
yeah, that is actually a lot. Um, but still, I mean, I would guess it's that sort of with the time you just start to ignore these cameras and sort of just see them as normal. Because I mean, if you think about it, most of this footage is never going to be actually watched. It's not like there's some guy sitting there looking at all the children. It's just you just store the footage, and then if there's some sort of incident comes up, then you look up the tapes. So
Considering that they're also looking for misbehavior among children, I think they kind of do watch them, at least on the fast
okay.
forward. That's what the article is saying. I mean, I'm going with
Okay.
what the inspectorate is saying there and the chairman of the kindergarten. So they kind of do watch it because they say that they also watch for misbehavior among children because it's children's free play without adult interference. But if a fight breaks out or something like that, they presumably intervene to prevent further injury. So I guess someone does watch them. But nevertheless, even if it is stored somewhere, why should that be okay? And again, I would probably be less radical on this issue if this would not be, uh, first of all, endorsed and paid for by the state, and secondly, if there would be reasonable options available to escape that from parents. I mean, if parents were, look, I would like to be to put our child in a place that is not, well, Big Brother watched. Thank you very much. If that were to be a very easy option available, I would probably be significantly less radical and significantly less pedantic over this.
Yeah, turning all the kindergartens into panopticons is, of course, is not something I favor. But um, the idea that this is a form of abuse that will inflict severe damage on children, I don't really think that's likely either. I think most children will just ignore the cameras and not really be bothered by them. Maybe that in itself is a problem because that
That's what I'm
means that
saying.
people
Yes.
people get complacent about
Hmm.
surveillance and so on. But I think it's that you can't have it both ways. Either people are very disturbed by this, and then it might be a form of abuse, or the thing about being complacent about it can't be a problem. It can't be both, is what
Well,
I'm saying.
it is a problem in a place where we all vote. That when you have the state proposing extending its surveillance, when you have two, three generations raised as in a constant state of surveillance, you'll have a very easy majority at the next elections. Yeah, sure, why not? I mean, I grew up supervised, surveilled all the time, and that I turned out quote unquote fine. So what's the problem? Do you have something to hide, comrade? That's what I fear probably the most, even more than the potential uh, disadvantages or problems inflicted upon the individual,
Hey,
the wider consequences.
I totally get that argument and I agree with it. I think it's a strong argument. But this in turn means that the sort of emotional damage inflicted on children is not going to be something that could be viewed as a form of abuse.
Hmm.
I think most children will deal with that just fine.
Okay, fair enough. Let's go to the last one, which is also about social engineering on children. Coming from the Telegraph, row over BBC transgender program aimed at children. A row has erupted over a BBC sex change program for children as young as 6, which follows a transgender schoolboy who takes sex change drugs. The show, available on the CBBC website, showcases an 11-year-old's struggle to secure hormones that will make it easier to have a sex change later in life by stunting puberty. Sorry. But campaigners have argued that exposing young minds to such controversial issues will only leave children utterly confused, the Mail on Sunday reported. A mother writing on the Mumsnet website said her daughter had questioned her gender identity and asked her anxiously if that means she was a boy. But the BBC said it was aiming to reflect true life, with enough context for young people to understand. Peter Bone, a Conservative MP, said it beggars belief that the BBC is making this program freely available to children as young as 6. I entirely share the anger of parents who just want to let their children be children. It is completely inappropriate for such material to be on the CBBC website, and I shall be writing to the BBC bosses to demand they take it down as soon as possible. Maria Miller, the former culture secretary, said she was worried about whether the BBC was tackling the subject in, quote, an age appropriate way, unquote, as she argued such a topic should be addressed, quote, where children can have support from parents, close quote. Julian Brazier, Tory MP, told the publication, this program is very disappointing and inappropriate. Children are very impressionable and this is going to confuse and worry them. Norman Wells, a family campaigner, said it is irresponsible of the BBC to introduce impressionable children as young as 6 to the idea that they can choose to be something other than their biological sex. Close quote. Just a Girl documents the life of a child who calls herself Amy. In her fictional video diary, Amy, who dresses as a girl, explained how she was born a boy called Ben, but is already in the process of halting puberty. Opponents to the use of drugs that stunt puberty argue most youngsters who grow confused about their sexuality in the end do not go through with surgery, and many discover they were just gay. Critics have said that promoting the idea of easy sex change surgery and the use of drugs is only leaving children utterly confused. Mr. Wells told the Mail on Sunday, quote, "The more we promote an idea that a boy can be born into a girl's body and a girl can be born into a boy's body and that drugs and surgery can put things right, the more children will become utterly confused. Respecting and preserving a child's birth sex should be seen as a child protection issue." However, not all parents are opposed to such views on gender. A parent wrote on Mumsnet, quote, "I don't believe there is too young for stuff like this. The earlier you teach your children that everyone is different and that nobody is normal, the better." Cuts like this should be locked up. A BBC spokesman said, quote, "Just a Girl is about a fictional transgender character trying to make sense of the world and deal with bullying and work out how to keep her friends, which are universal themes that many children can relate to and which has had a positive response from our audience." Sure it did. CBBC aims to reflect true life, providing content that mirrors the lives of as many UK children as possible, close quote. I'm sure they had a positive response from our audience. It's the BBC who measured it. It's not like the BBC has ever been wrong about the audience response of, well, pretty much everything. But yeah, I'm sure they had a positive response. I totally believe that. Not. So, the sooner you teach your children that there is no such thing as normal, the better. Really? Really?
Of course, there's such a thing as normal. It's just normal. It's not the same as good.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not normal in lots of ways, but I'm practically a freak. I mean, I read history books from the 18th century for fun, and that's history books written in the 18th century, not about the 18th century.
I can
That's
totally
certainly not,
relate to that.
that's certainly not normal, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, it's certainly better than watching some sort of trashy television show about I don't know, teenagers getting drunk or whatever. But that doesn't mean that watching television about some sort of crappy reality TV series is not normal. It's certainly normal, and
But that's
more's
not
the pity.
necessarily good.
But that doesn't mean that the word normal has no meaning anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, everyone is normal and abnormal depending on what you refer to. But in the context of this, I think most people are normal. Uh, we've discussed this multiple times, and most people and most adults, most children end up being adults that rather prefer a traditional arrangement, that are rather very okay with their sexual identity. So to say that there is no such thing as normal is just insane, especially considering that, well, reality kind of contradicts this. Um, I don't know if I necessarily agree entirely with the critics, but it is certainly true that presenting these kinds of things to confused children may not actually help. It may actually do much more harm than good.
Yeah, I don't know how much harm is actually going to do to children. I mean, this idea that children are so impressionable and fragile and they can't be shown this material, I don't really. I think that's very much overstated. I think children can handle a lot more than we give them credit for. And
Well, I certainly could. It's illegal to even talk about what the things that I have seen long before I was 12. So
I mean,
yeah.
And children watching, 6-year-old children watching this program are just going to think that this person is kind of weird and a freak and
Hmm.
maybe something like that, and then they're not going to say that, oh, maybe I should become a girl, or I should maybe become a boy, because wouldn't that be fun, or something like that. Um, People just are not that influenced by watching one television program.
Yes, that's true. In many cases, legislators and adults in general tend to give kids a lot less credit than they probably should. With that said, the promotion of things like puberty stunting drugs, I think that's highly problematic. Because the idea being sold to pretty much everyone is that these drugs don't really have any side effects, and that, well, if the individual changes his or her mind later in life, for instance, when the age of 15 or something, they can just go off those drugs, and then development will continue as it should have, starting from the age of 12 or 11. I'm not buying that. I don't think that's the case at all. And early research that has started slowly to be done, because many years it was de facto banned by the political LGBTs lobby. But now slowly it's starting to be allowed, and the early research pretty much tends to confirm the views of bigots, dinosaurs like me, that says, well, hold on a second, messing around with the prepubescent hormones such as stunt puberty is not really an exact science. It's not really that flawless and effectless as it's being sold.
Yes, yes, definitely. I also think I'm sort of more worried about impressionable parents watching this show than
Fair enough.
impressionable 6-year-olds. I don't think any sort of normal, and that's just what, again, 6-year-old will watch this program and then decide they want to get a sex change. But I mean, maybe not this particular program, but all this sort of propaganda put out there will influence a lot of parents, uh, and as I talked about last week, a lot of parents just want their child to be special in some way, and they're convinced that um, uh, this is sort of a convenient thing that they can put on all the problems that a child has. It's not that my son is maybe unachieving in school because he's lazy or not very intelligent or something like that. It's uh, because he has gender. It's because he's suffering from gender dysphoria, and that's why he can't focus on school or something like that.
Hmm.
These kinds of things are sort of comfortable things to believe for some parents, and um, I think that that's very much a problem. But I don't think that showing this to impressionable 6-year-olds is going to be that much of a deal.
Yeah, I totally agree with the impressionable parents part. I'm looking at I forgot the name, so I looked it up. The Brian Reimer case in Canada. It started in the 60s. The whole case existed, and the whole disaster that it followed. It happened precisely because impressionable parents believed the sales pitch of a gender identity doctor trying to make a quick buck, and who also happened to be, well, a pedophile and very, 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 very in bad relations with actual science, because, well, virtually all of his studies turned out to be either bollocks or completely impossible to replicate. But nevertheless, his sales pitch was good, and impressionable parents were eventually the one, not the children, that watched his because there was a time when his speeches were pretty much, well, without any sort of warnings and whatnot. It was the 60s. You could say whatever you want on TV, especially if you appear to be progressive and whatnot. Uh, so basically, yeah, I totally agree that impressionable parents are probably even the bigger problem. But nevertheless, at least in Britain, there are some very, very strong restrictions on these kinds of things applied to children, which is great. But then there are countries like Norway where children can legally apply to change their sex starting from the age of 7. And I think that those are the kinds of societies where this kind of propaganda is problematic. And you're right, it's not just this program alone. Maybe this program alone will not change much, for better or worse. But when you put it, I don't want to sound like a feminist, but this is a good phraseology. When you put it on a continuum, there is a continuum of transgenderist propaganda aimed at children, and it has significantly intensified in the last 4 or 5 years. When you put it on that sort of a continuum, that tends to produce rather unpleasant results. I fear that 20 years from now, when many of these quote unquote celebrity young trans kids will eventually grow up, we're going to be in for a lot of horror stories.
Yeah, and if they grow up, because there's a
Yes,
huge suicide rate among
yes,
transgender people, both before the transition and after. I
especially
think
after,
think
yes.
it's I think it's slightly lower after the transition, but still very, very high. Um, and that's tragic. And this sort of glamorization of transgender is doing people a very huge disservice.
And not only that, but there is also the struggle behind the scenes with various doctors and researchers and whatnot who sooner rather than later, and they come up to the pretty much the same conclusion independently, sometimes even without ever knowing each other and ever being aware of each other's work, that there is a significant an increasing body of evidence that most, at least 96% of the children who manifest these kinds of gender identity issues around the age of 10, 11, 12, 13, whatever, they eventually grow out of it, at least 96% of them. So maybe in that period, the sort of therapy to make them deal with reality rather than feelings is probably going to save more lives in than the suggestion that there is puberty stunting drugs available and sex change and whatnot, which would probably end up indirectly killing more people. As you said, the suicide rate amongst them is significantly higher than the general population. But then again, thanks to the political lobby, you're no longer allowed to say this. It's transphobic to say this.
Yeah, maybe they just want to produce more victims. So if the more transgender people there are, the more power they have, basically.
That's a very good point. Yeah. It
So
becomes this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy.
yeah, so if you transform a man who's not very masculine or a woman who's not very feminine into a transgender person, that's sort of one more person who's part of your political alliance, part of the sort of clientele that you speak for, and that gives you more votes, more power, and more influence. If you're the kind of person who's into that sort of game.
Yeah, that's a very good point. After all, there is what Esmail Yiannopoulos says. There is a dwindling supply of both victims and bigotry in general. So that's why you have this sort of huge quote unquote bigotry scandal that, oh my god, a bakery from some godforsaken village doesn't want to order a demand for wedding cake for non-straight people. That's
Yeah,
the level.
and
Go.
sometimes even sort of hypothetical scenarios like this. Um, this one, what it was at a pizza place that they were asked by some reporter if they hypothetically would supply a gay wedding, and they said no. Uh, no actual gays had been denied a pizza for their wedding, because I mean most people don't order pizza for weddings, uh, but still it was some sort of huge scandal. It's quite insane, really.
Yeah, so it's a dwindling supplies of both victims and bigotry because it just doesn't happen that much, and even the most bigoted individuals are actually significantly less bigoted than the normal consensus that you have on this topic, let's say in Saudi Arabia. So, as a result of that, probably this could be a good way. I mean, you create more victims, and once you create more victims, well, victimology is power these days.
Yep, and who cares about the lives destroyed in the process?
Well, the ends justify the means all the time for all totalitarians of all collectivist tribes. I mean, it's not like that's a new thing.
Yep.
All right. Okay. I guess we covered, we kind of exhausted the topic on the always be recording with my tangent on it. Sorry about that, but I don't know. If anyone learns one thing new from it, it's still good enough. I guess that's pretty much it. Next week for our listeners in the United States, same thing at 2 p.m. Central Time, because the United States is still on daylight savings time, whereas we in Europe have finally got out of it.
Back to real time.
Back to real time. Yeah, I just wish we could abolish daylight savings time. Period. It's just a complete
Yep.
insanity. And scheduling, I mean, scheduling conversations, for instance, with two people from the US, two from Europe, two from Australia. Good luck with that. Especially in October, early November, when everyone gets out or in the EST at different days and different.
You know,
Uh, Go ahead.
maybe if you have to have the, let's say, times, could you at least like coordinate on one day where the entire world changes, not this with crap where like some countries changed last weekend and some countries changing, what is it, like 2 weeks, something like that? Why not just have one day for everyone? It would be so much easier.
Yeah, well, and then you have, I mean, if you want to get into this, and we still have a little bit of time, there is places, for instance, in Arizona, the state of Arizona accepts daylight savings time, but then inside of Arizona, there are two Indian, well, American Indian, Native American nations, Navajo Nation and a smaller one, who don't accept um, DST. And in the middle of the Navajo territory, there is a separate nation that actually does accept DST. So you have a small section of the Arizona state where if you're driving through that place, that around 250 kilometers, you have to move your watch 1 hour ahead, 1 hour behind for like 6 or 7 times. It's amazing. I mean, it's these kinds of insanities that um, that kind of make things what the hell. And then you have the time zones. I mean, Indian standard time is not x hours ahead or ahead of Europe, for instance. No, it's x hours and a half, because potato. So for instance, right now it's almost 11 p.m. Eastern European time. Well, in India it's 2:30 a.m. because potato. So, I mean, the amount of insanity. I mean, I understand having different time zones. It makes perfect sense because, well, you have to have sort of day at around same periods of at least same construction. Five in the morning to be 5 in the morning rather than be extreme sunlight on 5 in the morning in December. I can understand having time zones, but I really don't understand this thing with half of a time zone, the daylight saving time. Uh, it's just madness, complete madness. And then you have Russia, which now has abolished all its time zones and got out of daylight savings time forever. They don't have daylight savings time anymore since 2010, 2011. So basically,
But
Moscow time. So
did, did,
basically,
did,
go ahead.
I thought they basically made daylight saving permanent, right?
Or
They're
whatever.
no
They
longer in
basically.
the proper time zone. Like they're no longer in the zone where like 12 is noon and uh, and 12 at night is the darkest part of night.
No,
So they basically like
when Europe got into the daylight savings time in late March, Russia stayed the same. When we got out of daylight savings time last weekend, Russia still stayed the same. They no longer do this kind of thing, move 1 hour behind, 1 hour up. That's one thing. And the second thing, they abolished all the time zones. So Moscow time is Moscow time for the entire country.
wow.
So imagine, I mean, at 5 p.m., for instance, in the middle of the summer is sunny and nice and shiny in St. Petersburg, but in Vladivostok it's already 3 hours of dark, 3 hours into the night. I mean, it's complete insanity. So yeah.
And just in case you weren't aware, Russia is quite a big country.
Yeah. It's only like a third of the planet distance from St. Petersburg from Vladivostok, roughly a third of the entire planet's land mass. So yeah, Vladivostok is bordering China, by the way. St. Petersburg is bordering the territorial waters of Finland. Uh, just saying. Anyway, with all of that being said, including the tangent about the Russian geography, I'm pretty much out of things to say. You're being around on November 11th, right?
I'm around then, yep, and until then, I recommend that you take the red pill.
Take the red pill. Goodbye, everyone.